Live from the Odix Studios, this is the Malware rebroadcast. Every episode, we feature top cybersecurity experts and thought leaders to discuss everything in the world of cyber. Want to contribute to the conversation? Write in the comments below or email us at info@odi-x.com. And without further ado, let's meet our panel.
Hi everybody, Yehuda Sunshine here, head of PR for Odix, for another fascinating session at the Odix Studios. Today we're going to be talking about cloud migration and mitigating cyber risk. We have a really exciting panel. I'm really pumped to have them here. Maybe I'll start by introducing everybody. First, we have Lance Solar from Clariter. Lance is an IT professional in product management with tons of experience guiding him in deploying projects, building solid business relationships, and developing and implementing systems and processes which have resulted in significant business contributions for over 25 years. Thank you so much for joining us, Lance.
My pleasure. Thanks, Yehuda.
Also joining us today is Patrick Bosch from SAP. Patrick has been working in the IT industry for nearly 20 years. Specifically in cybersecurity for a decade now, with a focus on SAP and ERP security. Recently, Patrick has published various books and articles as an expert specifically on SAP security, and he serves as an editor for the security platform Security Protection Magazine. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Yuda.
My pleasure. And last but not least, we have Odix CTO, Omri Tan. Omri leads our technical department and also is here for his looks and fashion sense. Thank you so much for joining us, Omri.
Always a pleasure.
The pleasure is all ours. So I wanted to discuss a little bit now that I have everybody here. We're here to kind of discuss cloud migration, why cloud migration has become such a focal point for both businesses and for the hacker community, and what we can do to give greater clarity to the process, as well as kind of illuminate some of the misconceptions that have been blinding people and the IT processes and the IT teams behind them in not ensuring the highest level of data security. So maybe we can start off with something basic. Lance, what is cloud migration and why has it become such a hot topic recently?
Cloud migration would be, in its simplest form, moving data from your local source, your own server room, your own rack of servers sitting at your hosting provider, like it has been in the past, moving it into a cloud platform. The biggest driver behind this in the past 2 years, just over 2 years, has definitely been the whole COVID outbreak, as that has caused people to move to working from home and necessitated IT departments around the world moving their data to a more easily accessible platform, as opposed to them still wanting to connect back to the office, however that connectivity works, back to the server in the office looking for their data. It's made life a hell of a lot easier for the work from home environment that COVID has forced us.
Interesting. Patrick, can you talk to us a little bit about what are some of the major factors that are involved in cloud migration? People kind of think that we're just putting a file here or there. It's a lot more integrated. It's a lot more involved. What are some of the steps that the IT community needs to be thinking about when they're thinking about migrating their data to the cloud?
Well, I think it's first of all, it's not only the data. I mean, that's probably what a lot of people think, because the sort of pioneers, or what people often associate with the cloud, are companies like Dropbox or OneDrive or even Google Drive, where you actually just essentially store data. And I'd like to bring that quote here, because I think any discussion about the cloud is not complete without the quote, which is saying that it's not the cloud, it's just someone else's computer. And that really, in a way, it does nail it. But then again, if you look at the more complex things like applications, like we at SAP experience, I think there's other aspects to migrating to the cloud, namely that everything is standardized and therefore cheaper for a customer to move to the cloud. And on the other hand, something I think we're here to discuss as well is the thing of security, because there are so many attacks going on these days that it's almost impossible for especially smaller companies to counter all these attacks, because they simply don't have the resources or knowledge on security to do that.
Very, very interesting. I was actually going to my next point to Omri. I was going to ask you what, like, especially for an SMB, should they be thinking about in the cloud migration process? They have limited resources, they have limited bandwidth. What are the low-hanging fruit that they really need to be thinking about that are so important in cloud migration at the early steps?
I think it's very dependent on the business itself and their business needs, but almost all SMBs already use cloud email, cloud storage. They use a lot of SaaS products from the get-go. And those who don't usually have regulatory requirements to not do it from the SMBs that we've met with. So I'd go with whatever is easiest to migrate, and the migration to SaaS offers and product services that are already battle tested with years of track record in the field, to avoid being the first customer trying out a new service and fumbling with it. Go out for something safe that will be easy to do, easy to migrate, and start from there and see how that goes, how people accept the change, receive the new way that data is processed, that software is used, and go from there.
Okay, great. So go after we've kind of defined what cloud migration is, I want to kind of switch it over to Lance and say, what are the biggest benefits to cloud migration? And then on the inverse, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you're leaving yourself out there?
The biggest benefits, as I see it, would definitely revolve around security. This whole idea or impression that if you have a server sitting in a server room in your office, that you're looking at that server, whatever data or application is hosted on that server is more secure in the cloud, is entirely incorrect. Because if you're using a proper cloud provider, they have teams of security consultants, of security engineers continuously monitoring the products and looking at what's going on and what's being attacked and how to react to the attacks, as opposed to your server sitting in the corner of your room where I'm thinking that little firewall that's connecting you to the internet is securing everything. I think that's a huge misconception that is still out there. That's my impression.
Patrick, what do you think? What do you think the risk reward of cloud migration is?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Lance. And I read about an interesting analogy, actually, and that's something which is often used in security, namely think about a medieval city, right? So you'd have the city walls, and you have archers on that wall, and all of this is something you can only finance if you're not the only one doing so. So if you want to protect your own house, you just don't have the resources to build a wall 6 meters high around the house and put all, like 100 of archers on there with bows and everything. You can only do that if you working together with all these other cloud customers. And that's why as I said, absolutely agree with Lance that the security of a cloud is just so much higher than if you would take care of everything yourself.
Mm-hmm. Omri, what do you got to say?
I think my main point with all the customers that we've talked about is that it is not the same. A lot of people have the sense that moving from on-prem to the cloud is just a lift and shift process to take your VMs, your services, your data, and just push it into the cloud, and that's that. So in any security services that you have in your on-prem environment, you'll just have an equivalent in the cloud. And it's not exactly like that. There are a lot of aspects to cloud computing, cloud storage that are a bit different and need to be addressed in a very cloud-specific manner to provide the levels of security that you would expect in an organizational environment.
Okay. So Patrick, what do you think some of the other major misconceptions are in cloud migration and things that, especially internally, the organization, especially non-technical people, think that this is the cure-all, or this cloud migration is going to enable us to do X, when in actuality, there's a very limited window in which it can protect you? What do you think some of those biggest misunderstandings are? And then the next step, I would say, what do you think we could really practically do to break that down, so we could tell people this is what cloud migration actually is doing, and this is why you think it does X, but it actually does Y?
As Amri already said, I think the cloud works differently than if you had something on-prem. It has some advantages. It also has some disadvantages, and we see that because if you look at SAP software, there's no two SAP systems which are exactly alike in the world. So there's a high amount of customization in those solutions, in those systems at the customer, and that is something, for example, which the cloud cannot provide in a way. I mean, you probably have to make the distinction between a public cloud and a private cloud, where the public cloud is the software as a service kind of thing, and that is highly standardized, which also means that some of the flexibility you might have with an on-premise solution is something you will not get in the cloud. On the other hand, because everything is standardized, you will be a lot quicker in using the software, and I think that is something which is important to know about the cloud, and that's also one of the biggest advantages of the cloud. It's not only that you can just start right away. I mean, if you're a small, medium-sized businesses, you just sign up for a cloud service or for a cloud application, and you're ready to go. That also includes the scalability, right? Because that is, if you look at the hyperscalers, AWS, Azure, and Google even, that's what their biggest selling point is. So regardless of whether you're a one-person company now, but you'll be a 100-person company in 2 months, you don't need to buy all the hardware to match that growth, but you just go to the cloud and they will do that for you. Or even maybe a more extreme example, you remember the Pokemon hype a couple of years back? They were only able.
I was personally responsible for all of it. Okay. Don't you see?
Yeah, well, but anyway, I mean, they were only able.
But I did it.
They were only able to do that because they were in the cloud. Because all of a sudden they were surprised by the popularity that gained, but they could scale because they were using that in the cloud. So I think that's that's probably one of the biggest aspects of migrating to the cloud: the flexibility and scalability.
So I want to ask Lance here. So what do you think some of the biggest differences and tangible benefits from a cloud solution versus on-prem? Because there, as we're saying, there's cost issues, there's practicality. What do you think the biggest motivation for a small business to move towards the cloud? And on the other side, why do you think that there's still some residual push to keep some assets or some aspects of data on-prem?
I think this has to be split up into quite a few different regions, quite a few answers. The first part about it is a lot of companies still want to look at a server, they want to see their own flashing lights, and they want to think that their critical data is too important and it can't be protected on the cloud. I think that's number one that we have to deal with. Number two is a concept that I often hear being thrown around, not as much today, but you heard of this whole thing called shadow IT. That's the term that we use when referring to the cloud services that are actually running inside your organization that you don't even know about. When somebody sitting in an accounting position or some sort of IT dev position has gone online and found a service and likes the service and is already using it inside your organization where you don't even know about it. That to me is more scary. So when it comes to specifically looking at an SMB, bigger organizations don't really have this problem. An SMB really needs somebody, a driving force within the organization, or a very good integrator that can hold their hand and show them the difference, what's in the cloud, what they're using locally, why it shouldn't be sitting locally, why it's more beneficial to be sitting in the cloud. That's absolutely critical.
Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna switch this to Omri here. We're talking about there's all these benefits, there's misconceptions. What do you think the most unrealistic expectation is for cloud migration? What, from across the board, from the IT community, from the non-technical people, what do you think the most unrealistic goal that they set that needs to be reassessed? And how can we kind of make this into something that's more realistic and practical in the process?
Wow, that's a good question. Um, so we've seen a few migrations where there was kind of an assumption that the technical skills and the technical cybersecurity skills that were enough in the on-prem environment would be enough in the cloud, because it is just a lift and shift process. We're just taking the VMs from our on-prem network, putting them in the cloud, taking firewall, moving into the cloud. And yeah, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. It is a completely different ecosystem that requires in-depth knowledge, training, and skills to be able to properly secure it.
Okay, great. So Patrick, from your experience, what have you heard? What's the feeling that you've gotten, and why do you think that there's this current of confusion and what can be expected in cloud migration?
Yeah, I think for us as SAP, as I mentioned, our solutions are usually highly configurable. And the most common misconception we actually see is that people think everything they are able to do on-prem, they're also able to do in the cloud. Now we also have the distinction, as I mentioned earlier, between the public cloud and the private cloud. And the private cloud is essentially, you have a lot more control and flexibility compared to the public cloud. So it really depends on the customer's status. If you are new to SAP, the public cloud will probably be the go-to choice. If you have an on-premise SAP system and you are migrating to the cloud, then the private cloud would probably something which you would go for, which you would choose, because you have the possibility to adapt all the processes which have been established over years. But that's something which needs to be considered as well. If you think that going to the cloud will give you the possibility to keep every single process that you had in the past, you have to rethink. That's definitely, I think that's probably the biggest misconception. Not everything you're used to will be working in the cloud the same as it would be on-prem.
There's no silver bullet in anything, let alone IT. So I want to address the audience here a little bit. We'd love to hear your comments, your questions, anything that you have to say, anything that you want to hear from the panelists. Please put it in the chat. Please put it in the comments section. We'll be happy to address it. Switching back to Lance here, from your experience, why do you think people have these unrealistic expectations, and how have you been able to kind of bring them back? We've kind of spoken a little bit offline about the consistency in your cyber education training and the relationship that you have with people in IT and outside of IT. How has that influenced their understanding of cloud migration and kind of brought back the realistic expectations?
Well, I think the most important aspect here is to manage their expectation, to see what they're expecting. Like any good project plan, take your expectations, take your end results, how you're going to get there, and who needs to be involved in it, and who needs to be trained up on it. And then for them to understand that for argument's sake, when the file server was sitting next to them, if they clicked on a file, it opened instantaneously. If that data is now sitting in the cloud, that particular application might be a half a second as opposed to instantaneous. But then the difference is when their big applications are shifted to the cloud, when they're accessing their applications, they're now running on much more powerful, scalable servers, hopefully, that experience should be that much better than the server sitting on the cloud. But like I said, getting back to basics is manage expectations. Tell them what they can and can't do. Make sure they're educated. Make sure they understand the difference of accessing a server sitting next to them as opposed to a server that could be sitting anywhere in the world, replicated to anywhere else in the world. There's speed differences. There's the whole experience is different. Yeah, the expectations. I'm going to keep on harping on that, but manage the user's expectations.
I mean, I think it's really key when you talk about implementing these IT processes and who's implementing it, the staff, the people that you're connecting to, and the relationships and the skills that you build within them are way more valuable than just screaming fear or having a disconnected email. It's really important to resonate with these people, resonate with your team, and enable them to feel empowered to be able to stop this threat versus feeling overwhelmed. And I think that it's worthwhile to mention that and to kind of discuss a little bit more what the steps are to be able to empower our teams outside of IT to understand the value in this and change the relationship from something that's reactionary to something that's proactive. Patrick, what do you think? Or Vlad, so sorry to cut you off. Please continue.
The only other point I wanted to make is if we're going to look specifically at security or mail security, that's been a problem going back quite a while. It's also about education, making sure that the customers are properly educated to know how to react, because one argument I've always had is you can't control people with technology. You can use technology to assist people, but if they're going to make a mess up, they'll find a way to get around the technology that you put in place.
Until the Terminators take over in the near future. Of course. Patrick, what do you think?
Yeah, maybe to add to what Lance just said, I mean, the flexibility goes both ways, right? I mean, maybe if I take SAP as an example, it might be that it's a little bit less flexible if you go to the public cloud. On the other hand, you have more flexibility in where are you working from, because if you have that server on-prem, your IT team might not be able to give you the sort of comfort of just using any web browser literally anywhere in the world to access your application, to access your data. They might be able to do that, but then it comes down to security, because exposing something to the internet so that anyone can access that is a very complex task for security. So for an on-premise solution, they would probably use a VPN service or something like that, which is something you might not have to do in the public cloud. So again, adding to what Lance said, manage expectations, but also tell them that there's disadvantages, but you have a lot more advantages of going to the cloud as well.
So I think that's really valuable, and that kind of goes to my next question that I wanted to address to Omri. How can you correlate and convince non-technical staff the value of cloud migration and why we need to implement it? This is Father Omri, not to be previously confused with exclusively CTO Omri. We wear lots of hats around these parts, even if he's not physically wearing a hat. So Omri, why do you think we need to tell the non-technical staff? How can you connect with them? And what are some simple benchmarks that you can tell them? Why are we going through this process? What are you going to gain? Why do you need to listen to my spiel? What are you going to get from this?
So first of all, sorry for the additional guest. Yeah, not a fan of cloud migration. I'll get back to you in a second.
She's an on-prem gal, I heard. Should we come back to you after a little bit of shushing? We could do that. I think we could do that. Lance, what do you think from your experience, why you need to convey this, and what have been the easy wins that you've been able to convince your staff that this is why we're doing it? I might not understand the IT process, I might not understand cyber risk, but why are we doing this, and why should I actively participate?
Well, if you want to work from home, or if you want to work when you're out of the country, how painless do you want the process to be? Do you want to rely on, I mean, I don't even want to say it, but some free Wi-Fi sitting at an internet cafe or a hotel to access your critical company data, sitting in a server, sitting in your office somewhere in the world? like Patrick said, even worse, having this internal server exposed externally somehow. If you're going to expose that server, when it does get breached, what data are they going to be able to get to? How bad is the damage going to be? How do you mitigate that risk? It's just the whole process of being able to work from anywhere in the world and knowing you're working in a secure environment. To me, that's the biggest win. As an IT person, as an end user, I want to know that if I'm sitting in my apartment, or if I'm sitting on holiday on the beach somewhere else in the world, that I have the same secure access to my data and the same seamless experience.
I mean, I think that you can't beat it there, regardless of what your background is, and especially in the COVID, post-COVID world. Nobody wants to have an obstacle get in their way of the flexibility that they're going to need to be able to react to whatever event from whatever is happening. I know Patrick just came out of quarantine, and I'm sure he's also appreciative of this cloud process just a little bit. Why do you think we could tell people in another way I mean, it's hard to have an easier win than remote work and your company doesn't get blasted, but how else can we convey this? And do you think that there's something that we could do? Is it a cyber education program? Is it gamification? What do you think that we can do that's a little bit non-traditional to make this risk more real and to make it something tangible for people who might not necessarily connect with the technical side?
That's a good question, because I think it's not so much the sort of educating people is not so much about the cloud, but it's about security. And for security, we definitely need to do a lot more education, general education. From my personal point of view, and we actually discussed, or we touched that point during the last panel back in October. Remember that? Mm-hmm. I think that cybersecurity education should be as common, and it should be sort of something that everybody knows, similar to not crossing a red light or not crossing the street without looking left or right where the car is coming. And we're still not there, but that's definitely something we should be going to, or should be getting at. But I think that's more or less independent of the cloud. Having said that, from the company's perspective, so sort of the operations, the IT, and also the costs, I think it's definitely worthwhile thinking about the cloud wherever you can.
Great. Is Omri back, or is he still parenting? We're always parenting, but is he parenting on screen? So let's see. I kind of want to go from here to some practical solutions and easy wins in cloud migration. From your experience, Omri's back. Just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you have to say?
Hopefully, seems.
Just speak slowly and kind of coo to us in the process. You can speak by back as well. Yeah,
exactly. It's going to be a very mellow response. I think that cloud services, cloud platforms, they bring in a certain velocity of processes of deployment, and it's much easier to deploy, develop new services, new methods to communicate with customers, with prospects. And I think that in a lot of cases, that is kind of, and the speed that new things are deployed usually comes at a cost of neglecting security a bit. Because everything is just click a button, drag and drop, and there is a kind of sense that it is deployed with proper security settings, with proper defaults, and it not always is. So it kind of creates a flood of new channels, new vectors that the organization needs to deal with after migrating.
Great. So Lance, we've kind of talked about some of the misconceptions. We've cleared up a little bit about the value of cloud migration. What are some of the easy wins in cloud migration? When I'm thinking about the process, what are going to be the highest ROIs and something that I can show my investors, I can show my team, this is why we're doing it, and this is what we're achieving compared to our previous system?
If you want to look at really low-hanging fruit, I mean, take something simple. I'll mention both products because they're very similar, and I don't want to seem to favor one product. If you look at G Suite or Office 365, the old days, you might have had a mail server sitting in the corner of a room somewhere. The resources you had to throw at that mail server to make sure that, if we look at Microsoft's product Exchange, that you had to have an Exchange specialist either on your staff or on call, that when the server decided to do something strange, you could quickly get hold of someone before the director's emails weren't working. Today, it's very different. Today, that's no longer the IT department's problem. So you've shifted your mail from sitting in-house to an outsourced provider, like I say, either G Suite or Office 365, and you're not worrying about technically who's running the system. You're simply saying, well, here's my email. I want to access my email from any of my devices, from my phones, my laptops, my tablets, whatever my device might be. And I don't want to worry who's on the other side of that. I don't want to worry that when there's an issue that I'm calling my IT guy and say to my IT guy, why is my mailbox out of space? Why can't I send an email? Why is this mail bouncing? That is the quickest low-hanging fruit, the quickest win. And then on top of that, introducing other products like Teams, which has Microsoft Teams specifically, where I've seen the uptake to be massive over the past 2 years, where it's become a lot easier to have a conference call, to have a demonstration, a presentation, internally and externally. Those are very quick, very low-hanging fruit, and you see a very quick return on investment around that. It does introduce its own risks again, so those have to be managed. But yeah, definitely those products.
Mm-hmm. Omri, what do you think? What do you think of the easy wins that you can kind of get across to your team of why we should do cloud migration, we should push this across, and how can you articulate this? What do you think?
I think we had great success with moving our entire CI/CD process from on-prem environment to the cloud. It made life much easier for everybody involved, developers, QA teams, deployment. It sped things up like at exponential rates. So if you're a development company, I'd really recommend moving any CI/CD pipelines that you have, moving them to the cloud. And if not, any collaboration tool, not just mail, but chats, whether it's Teams or Slack, any shared drives, OneDrive, Box, Dropbox, any collaboration tool that is used in the organization would be much, much easier for everyone in the organization and external collaborators if it'll be pushed to the cloud.
For sure. Patrick, do we miss anything? What do you think the easy wins are?
Yeah, obviously I'd like to put the focus a little bit more on applications, but it's in essence it's similar. But if you take something like a CRM, CRM is something that every company needs at one point in their sort of growth time, so to speak, and of course, there are very good on-premise CRM solutions. I mean, we do have one as well. But on the other hand, if you opt for something in the cloud, you know that there are people who are experts in that particular field. That can be CRM, it could be an ERP system, it could be any application, and they know what the customers need because they've done that for decades, sometimes even, and your IT department doesn't need to acquire that knowledge. It's already there. And I think that's also a very good reason and a quick win when you move to the cloud.
Cool. So I want to talk a little bit about resilience in cloud migration. What are some of the processes that we can ensure that your migration goes properly, that you can ensure that the various processes have been integrated appropriately, and how can we understand what hackers are looking for, where those gaps are? So Lance, what do you think we can do from a resilience perspective, and how can you articulate this to the IT team in the process?
First of all, planning. I can't stress how important Full planning is to understand where you are, where you want to be, and how you're going to get there. Without planning, it's all worth nothing. Again, communicating it back to everyone. And also on the back of that, having some sort of disaster recovery and a backup plan. Another misconception that I've come across with the cloud is everybody thinks that everything sitting in the cloud is backed up. If you, we've been speaking briefly about OneDrive. A lot of people today have their data in either OneDrive, Box, Dropbox, any of these places. Never make the assumption that because it's sitting there, it's backed up. You still need to have some plan behind that, backing up the data sitting there, that when it does get encrypted by ransomware and it replicates up to your OneDrive, that you still have a backup of the data. You can't go to your cloud provider and say, hey, it's your job to back up. I know Microsoft specifically come out and say that we don't back up. We don't offer a backup service. You have to use a third party. Yeah, that's my take on this.
Mm-hmm. Omri, what do you think? You with us? Can you hear us? We can't hear you.
Yeah.
I can feel your presence. There we go.
Yeah, I'm talk in mute most of my life. I think most of it we've covered. Just make sure that your data is backed up, that your data is secure, that, in case, and this happens sometimes, not a lot, but cloud data centers can be offline for hours, days in worst case scenarios. And you need to make sure that you're resilient enough, that your platform is robust enough to continue working in these events and not have your entire organization crippled due to infrastructure problems, even though it's not something that occurs very often or at large intervals. But when it does happen, you need to make sure that you will be ready to hit the ground running, and get everything up from either a different data store, different data center, DR if you have any. That's how I see it.
Great. So I want to ask a little bit. I want to ask Patrick here. How do you go about the process of picking the right cloud service provider? There's a lot of different elements in the cloud migration process. What do you think a business should be looking for when they're trying to select the ideal provider for their needs and their security needs specifically?
I don't think there's a sort of a recipe which is true for every or any company. I think it really depends on the current situation. Are you a small company? Are you a bigger company? How much flexibility do you need in configuration? How price sensitive are you? I think that's also a very big point in that. We mentioned a couple of solutions here, like G Suite and Office 365, maybe, to take an example. I think they're about similar priced, but as a very small company, even that might be too much for you. So you maybe choose a totally different provider, but then that would also go with lack of features. So for example, if you just go to a web hosting provider and just have an email, you're lacking all the Teams integration or collaboration features which you would have with G Suite or 365. So it's highly dependent on your situation as a company of what cloud provider you might choose. But on the other hand, if we look at it from a security perspective, I think that a lot of times the big cloud providers are more secure than some of the smaller cloud providers.
Lance, do you agree? What do you think?
Yeah, I've got to agree with Patrick there. I mean, there's, first of all, the bigger the provider, the more security, the more money they have to throw at the problem. You talk about a financial implication when, it's how much money do you have to throw at it? You want a solution that works. What's the saying? Penny wise, pound foolish. You're going to save $5 per user per quarter or whatever it might be. But what is the trade-off? What are you getting for saving that money? Are you getting less features? Are you getting less security? something's got to give where the money's not there. The money is important. I understand we all work with budgets, but yeah, you get what you pay for, especially in this field.
Mm-hmm. Omri, do you agree with this here? Do you think that people, when they're focusing on the cloud service provider, they also need to be thinking about, the cloud security posture management elements, the SIEM elements? Where do these all kind of intersect in understanding how you're supposed to onboard this and kind of balance the elements properly?
So I think it should be a top priority. Of course, cost is always a big deal, but we've seen cyber attacks and their effects on businesses. And if you're willing to skim a few bucks every month and go for a less secure option, that might, in the long run, cause you to have security issues and have a security incident. You'll pay tens or hundredfold that money that you've saved. So, as I see it, it's pretty much, it's a no-brainer. If it costs, an additional few bucks per month, even if it costs a few hundreds, thousands, it's something that, it's priceless. It really is priceless. We can talk about the models behind it, cyber insurance, etc. But I've never once regretted paying additional money for security tools, especially when it's not big money, to be able to sleep better at night. And when there's the next big cybersecurity thing going on, having my vendor send me an email saying, "Listen, we got this covered. Like in a matter of minutes, you can sleep well tonight." That's everything for me.
And that's all well and good. I'd love to have that approach. It seems like, especially for small businesses or for those who have a very limited budget, the idea that their data or the value of their security is priceless. It seems like it's very difficult, because if you don't price that equation and you don't say, I need to manage this risk equation, you're either going to be over investing in something or not necessarily understanding that you're limited. So do you think that that's viable? Do you think that security first approach, regardless of the budgetary constraints, is realistic? Patrick, do you think that that's something that we need to kind of take down, or do you think that we can kind of devalue the data a little bit to be practical?
No, I think security first approach is where we need to get at, actually. I mean, I mentioned that earlier about the cybersecurity education, but I think we definitely should go for a security first approach. And if you compare that to, say, a house, right? If you're building a house, obviously it's, you want it to be stable. You want it to be, not, if you think of that, the fairy tale of Three Little Pigs, where the wolf basically blows the house away. We don't want that to happen. And that's exactly how I see cloud. So you first of all have to ensure that the security is there, and everything else is just sort of added value.
Mm-hmm. To kind of take from the comments section a little bit, our friend Mike Jones from the Hunted Hacker is talking about the international element in cloud security, and I'd love to hear your collective thoughts on how you feel, especially Russia, China, a lot of these around these adversary states, how their cyber programs are impacting cloud security and cloud migration processes. Lance, what do you think?
You have some very big threat actors coming from those regions. I mean, China specifically, it's state sponsored. I'm sure in Iran it's state sponsored. I'm not sure what it is to the same degree, but yeah, you've got to keep your systems and your security quite strong. There's a joke I saw recently in the IT security world that if you set your computer's language to be Russian, you're not going to get affected by ransomware because it overlooks Russian computers.
If only it only overlooks certain Russian computers.
Yeah, it's a bit tongue in cheek here, but like I say, you have to be aware. And in the old days, you could simply geo-block, which means that you could stop traffic coming from those specific regions. But today, when the traffic hits your server, your computer, you have no idea where it's originating from. So again, training, the correct security products. When something happens, who knows about it? That's also very critical. Assuming there's a breach or a breach is in progress, who's getting the reports about this traffic that's hitting your system? Who's able to respond to those breaches? Or does it just go unnoticed until it's too late?
Mm-hmm. Well, Marie, do you think that we should be concerned? Do you think there's anything that we could proactively do to prepare ourselves for this nation state incursion? Or do you think that this is part of the general cyber threat? We kind of have to just take it on the chin.
So there are two things about it. The first is, of course, in the cloud, you have the shared responsibility with the cloud provider, which can give you much higher levels of security on the infrastructure and base layers than you would in your on-prem environment. And I heard a while back that, when a bear chases you, you don't need to outrun the bear. You need to outrun the guy who's running next to you. So I don't know who's due credit for that saying, but I think it's just that don't be the easy target. Make sure you do a few very basic minimal steps. You don't want to go for the advanced, high-end, costly security solutions. Get something in place. Make yourself a not worthy target. It's eventually all a game of cost and effort and effects. And if it will be too costly to get into your infrastructure, because there are other targets that it'll be easier to get there and extract their data, then you've won. You don't have perfect security, but you've outrun the guys next to you, so you're good. So I think that's a good starting point, like doing something to not be the last in the group, but get a bit higher. If you have higher security needs, you deal with PII, you deal with data, much more sensitive data, medical data, etc. Then you need to take it up a notch. But basically, just don't be, the low-hanging fruit.
So, Patrick, what do you think? How are nation states and the role of these international cyber players impacting security on the cloud? And what can I do practically? Should I be thinking about this threat, or should I generally be thinking about cloud security in the migration process? And this is just one element.
I think Omri just pretty much nailed it. You should be thinking about not being the easy target. I love that analogy with the bear. I've been using that a couple of times as well. But when it comes to nation states, on the other hand, and I know that sounds a little bit pessimistic, but quite honestly, and Lance mentioned earlier that big cloud providers are more secure because they can just throw so much money at it. That's also, on the other hand, if you look at nation state cyber attacks, quite honestly, if the NSA wants to get into a computer, they will. Regardless of what cloud provider you're using or where you are in the world, they will get into it.
We'll be careful. I think our connection's about to go down. I think our connection's about to go down.
Yeah, I think that's the reality. But again, you can still be very secure by not being the easy target, as Omri mentioned. Yeah.
Continuing with the Q&A, if that works with everybody, I want to ask Lance, this is from Maria. What are some of the concerns and cyber risks regarding resiliency on the cloud?
Cyber risks regarding resiliency. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
I'll expand a little bit. What are some of the things that we're concerned about that you wouldn't necessarily have on an on-prem solution, and some of the issues that can be I don't know, complicated in the migration process?
So the bigger thing is that it's interesting what Patrick mentioned as well here, is that, building on what I said, is that your bigger providers have more money to throw at the problem, but the converse of that argument is that they're a much bigger threat vector. someone is going to much rather want to hack Microsoft's Office 365 platform as opposed to my little file server sitting in the corner of my office. So you need to make sure that whoever you're dealing with has the ability, has the infrastructure in place to protect you from things like that, knowing that they're a much bigger threat vector. If you look at SAP HANA, for argument's sake, it's a very big platform. If somebody really wants to have a go at SAP, they'd much rather attack the HANA platform than a SAP server sitting in the corner of my office.
For sure, for sure. Well, Marie, what do you think? What are some resiliency issues that we have in the cloud migration process?
Well, they say that each cloud migration is different, but
it's like a child. It's like a child.
No,
so
for
you
sure.
have like on your chest right now.
But I think that you need to make sure that everything is. We covered it a few times, but I'll just say it again. Everything is backed up. That you have a DR plan if data center goes down, that you can continue operating, that all your data will not be lost, even if it happens. If we're talking about SaaS solutions, make sure that they're configured properly. If you don't have in-house resources, bring in third parties that can do it. It typically takes, just a few hours for an initial setup that will be robust enough to keep the organization safe. And good luck to anyone starting the migration.
Good luck to us all. So I want to take one last question from the comments before you do closing remarks. Nubuharu Suzuki asks to discuss a little bit the authentication before connection process. Patrick, do you want to give us a little bit of some insight?
Well, authentication, that's actually a difficult one, because you have all these authentication solutions out there, and usually for most companies that will boil down to something like single sign-on, because you don't want all of your employees to log on to your CRM system and then log on with another password, another user. You want that centralized, and that's sort of the downside. But it's as I said, single sign-on is probably the solution going forward. And we have a lot of industry standards out there which take care of that, like OAuth and all these kind of solutions. So I think that is something which is pretty much secure and pretty well proven among pretty much all cloud providers support these solutions these days. So I think it's something to think about, something to consider, definitely. But there are also good solutions out there.
Lance, do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you think?
I agree. The only thing with these different types of authentication, what's absolutely critical is that two-factor authentication is a must. If anyone is relying on a username and password, today I tell the majority of my users that your password is almost irrelevant, because your password is not really what's authenticating you. It's the first step of a two-factor process. Then, if you're not running that second factor, that second authenticator, don't tell me when you've been breached. I don't want to know, because it's too easy to get into a system not using that. I'm not talking about single sign-on, because I do agree with Patrick. Single sign-on obviously makes it easier. When I go into a system, it says my name is Lance, I'm authorized to access the following without entering my username and password again. But you have to have two-factor authentication. I'm not sure. Am I allowed to mention specific companies here that have solutions like this?
You can do whatever you want, and once again, we'll get attacked later in the comment section. It's fine. We'll deal with the consequences. Lance speaks for himself.
I've seen some. For starters, I do believe that any company, any person accessing anything critical inside a company, be it in a cloud infrastructure or external, should have another layer of security, a VPN type solution. Looking at companies like Perimeter 81, they have a very interesting product that works well. Other companies I saw some years back, Secret Double Octopus, which is an Israeli product. There's some very, very good secure products. Don't assume that your username and password is good enough. Don't assume that connecting to a resource and logging on, unless you have another layer of security over and above your simple logon, don't assume you're protected. Don't make that mistake.
Great. I want to close up, but there was one last question that got asked that was just really, really awesome from Hugh Rayner. Are there any environments that you would specifically advise against cloud migration? I really think it's an interesting question. We've been so gung-ho about the value and the added benefit. Omri, what do you think? Where would you tell somebody this isn't really a good option for your business, for your sector, for your data, and maybe you should think of more of an on-prem solution?
Wow, it's I don't know. Hugh, are you from a specific sector? Do you have anything specific in mind? But in a general sense, there is a process to migrating to the cloud. And it's not just, turning off your on-prem email server and purchasing SaaS email services. It's not just migrating your VMs to any cloud provider. It is a process that typically takes a few months or years, depending on the company size and the number of assets that are migrated. And I think that we've seen a lot of, if I try to look at attempts to migrate that, had a lot of friction, then we've seen a lot of critical infrastructure that really had, problems migrating due to regulation, due to, the insane levels of security that they need to provide, critical infrastructure such as water treatment, electricity, hospitals, etc. So critical infrastructure is obviously just as they were with other technologies, they're probably the late adopters. I do think they will get there. We're seeing that a lot. And I think that any business that wants to do that process, the migration process, needs to take into account that they will need some knowledge, understanding, and expertise of what is about to happen, whether it be an in-house or from a third party.
Patrick, can you think of any glaring examples where you would say cloud migration is not for you? You should seriously consider another option.
Yeah, I actually had an example which I learned about a few years back, and that actually deals with top secret military systems, right? You don't want them to move into the cloud at no cost at all. And the example I'm thinking of, they literally had a separate building, a separate network. Everything was completely separated, and if you wanted to exchange data, you would literally have to do that with a remember the compact disc DVDs?
Oh, those are good old times. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So that's definitely something, but then I think that Omri mentioned that it sort of falls under critical infrastructure. And these days, I think one part might also be, which is not necessarily not being able to move into the cloud, but choosing very, very carefully, is if you have highly sensitive personal data. Because of, remember what happened with privacy shields and all the transfer of data between the US and then Europe. That's something where I would also see at least a reason not to move into the cloud right now, but maybe wait until all that sort of fog has cleared up.
Before we go to closing remarks, Lance, what do you think? Are there any examples that you could think of where you would tell them cloud migration going to be problematic? There's going to be more complications than it's worth. We should really consider this process again.
The only thing that comes to mind immediately, apart from what's already been mentioned here, is if a company has an extreme high-speed database system where it can become exorbitant to move it to the cloud, where you require very, very high speed. It's not really disk access, but yeah, what we did call disk access, it just gets too expensive. That's the only time I would say no. Where it's all you've already invested the money, the infrastructure sitting in your office. You want to sweat the asset for a few years, and then evaluate instead of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars because you require such high speed disk access.
Very, very interesting to consider all of these elements, because I think that especially what Omri and Patrick brought up, it's these easy wins when you're critical infrastructure, if it's a hospital, if it's the military and the secure data. But I think it's very important to bring in the cost aspect and to be able to be very practical with it. So on that element, I'd like to kind of do some closing remarks, kind of hear what you guys think are the most important elements in the cloud migration process, and what are the most salient points that we should leave our audience with. Lance, what do you think?
For starters, planning. I can't emphasize planning enough. Manage expectation, and then security considerations of where you're moving to.
Patrick?
Yeah, the security considerations, but also keep in mind the security advantages if you're hesitant of moving to the cloud. And besides the planning that Lance already mentioned, take a good look at what the cloud offers and whether it actually sort of is able to mirror and adapt your processes in the cloud as opposed to on-prem.
Great. Rocking baby Omri, what should we take from this conversation?
I think that, it's a process. It's a long haul. It's not just a lift and shift where you take your stuff and just dump it into the cloud. There are a lot of things to take into account, a lot of aspects, security-wise, IT-wise, and as Lance mentioned, of course, planning. And I think another thing that we found useful with customers is to understand where your data is going to reside and how it will be treated, encryption-wise, backup-wise, storage-wise, etc.
Great. So on that note, I want to thank our panelists. Omri, always a pleasure. Lance, thank you so much for joining us. Patrick, it's always an honor to have a conversation with you. I'd like to thank our audience, so many people commenting and participating and attending this. It was really, really special to have everybody here. Please follow us on social media. Follow Patrick's writing. Everything he writes is fantastic. Really, really interesting, insightful stuff. And I'd like to invite everybody to join us to the next panel, to stay safe and to think about cloud migration a little bit more critically. Have a good day, and everybody have a good life. Stay good.
Thank you for attending the Malware-free broadcast, powered by Odix. All episodes, including this one, are available at the Odix LinkedIn and YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and follow us.